Lucy Cooper, Charlotte Hayes, Becky Lefebvre. What did all these women have in common? Well, they were all featured in a book that could fit inside a gentleman's waistcoat. The list of Covent Garden ladies, an almanac of sex workers. Welcome to Sex in Georgian Britain.
When you think of sex in the Georgian period, you're probably thinking about the Netflix series Bridgerton. Bridgerton pokes its nose into an incredibly wealthy group of siblings and the society that surrounds them. The stories focus closely on lots of sexy young people having a lot of romance and, surprisingly, loads of sex. Jane Austen was never this much fun. But this kind of sex wasn't the reality for most people in this period. So what was it really like back then? Bridgerton, Pride and Prejudice, or something else? I'm Dr. Kate Lister and I'll be guiding you through sex in the gritty Georgian period. We'll be taking off the rose-tinted glasses of the Regency as we unlace the corsets and unbutton the breeches of the Georgians.
But if we turn it around here, it's caused a hole in the skull.
Is that a real skull?
That's a real skull.
Poor bugger.
Yeah.
Meeting expert historians.
Do you think it was wet? Do you think they wet it?
Well, fallopian does suggest saliva. So, yes.
There's just no amount of spit in the world that's going to make that.
It's not enough. It's not going to make it comfortable, is it?
I'm going to find out what real people were up to in the bedrooms, back rooms, and even caves of the 18th century.
This is a programme about sex, drugs and rock and roll. Historically, of course, but you need to consider this your fair dues warning. If you are easily shocked or easily offended, just give us a skip. Don't be writing us angry letters later, because we are talking about sex in Georgian Britain.
I'm starting my adventure into the world of Georgian sex right here in Covent Garden. Today, this place draws thousands of tourists eager to visit one of London's most famous marketplaces and have a share of the fun. But just like today, in the 18th century, this place was a thriving entertainment area. Here, people from all walks of life came together to create a blended social landscape. Dukes would be rubbing shoulders with paupers and publicans, and it was a place where sex workers could become celebrities.
In the Georgian period, this was the bustling heart of the entire city. There would have been shops and restaurants and coffee houses and boozers, much like there is today, and people all over the place. And of course, lots and lots of sex. The Georgians didn't invent sex, not by a long shot, but did they ever enjoy it? In fact, in many ways, the Georgian period saw the first modern sexual revolution.
Attitudes to sex before the Georgians was largely based in Christian religious teaching. Now that didn't stop in the 18th century, but it certainly loosened.
When was the Georgian period, you might ask? Well, it was from 1714 to 1837, and it was marked by 4 kings: George, and another one called William, who really was letting the side down as far as names go. But it was a period in our history marked by phenomenal change: social, political, cultural, and sexual. It was loud, it was outrageous, it was a revolution.
But how did this growing sexual revolution begin? One of the ways that people could quell their sexual needs, just like today, was through porn and erotic fiction. Hundreds of years before the internet, porn was big business. Historian Julie Peakman is on hand to show me more.
Julie Peakman, we are here in a pub, which is one of my favourite places, to talk to you about one of my favourite historical subjects, porn. So the Georgians, they have a reputation for being a pretty racy bunch, a right bunch of goers. Did they have porn?
They had lots of pornography. However, at the early part of the period when pornography was developing, it was mainly euphemistic, erotica.
Okay.
So it wasn't full-blown graphic sex. That started with the Italians, in fact, in the 16th century. And it was only by the middle of the 18th century that we actually got our own British homegrown pornography.
Like that is kind of patriotic porn.
Yeah, and John Cleland was obviously responsible for that.
Mr. Fanny Hill.
Yeah, actually it was called Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, and it became commonly known as Fanny Hill.
Fanny Hill was published in 1748 and tells the story of Fanny's sexual coming of age. It was a bestseller and it was the first erotic novel that we had here in the UK. Can I ask, what's the difference between erotica and porn?
It wasn't just sort of trashy, sexy books, but it was also things like salacious poems that came out, ribald songs that came out, and things like sex manuals. So very often they were classed as erotica rather than the graphic novellas that came out, which we class as proper pornography.
Was there porn bookshops, or would it be like that you had to go into like the 18th century equivalent of a Waterstones and kind of give it like a wink wink nudge nudge something for the weekend, sir?
It was a bit more public than that, actually. Very often they'd sell them from the back door of taverns like this and coffee shops under the counter.
Literacy rates couldn't have been amazing in the 18th century, and if a lot of the porn/erotica that's coming out is the written word, was this a rich man's game?
You could get very beautiful leather-bound pornography, which was for the elite gentleman. However, for the middling sort, you could get sort of just bound and stitched paper versions, or going right down to the lower classes, you could get broadsheets. You could get it throughout the whole spectrum of society.
Do you think it changed attitudes to women that have been selling sex?
I don't think attitudes had changed much right up until today. I think misogyny is just still rife. And you look at the erotica, I find the most interesting thing about the early pornography and erotica was that there was this sort of joint jolly quality when they were having sex. And yet as it developed, by the 19th century, you get increasing violence towards women.
But it wasn't just porn and erotic fiction that people could buy with their extra cash. There were hundreds of women, from streetwalkers to courtesans, who were all exchanging a night with Venus for a price. Now, if you were looking for a good time, Georgian Covent Garden was the place to be. This was the Regency hotspot for all kinds of frolics, including those engaging in the rather naughtier aspects of the ton. And there was one legendary location where you could easily find a bedfellow for the night. Right here, where I'm stood, there was once the famous Shakespeare's Head Tavern. It burned down in 1808, but before that, it had been immortalised by a man called Jack Harris, alongside several hundred women who were selling sex in the capital, in his list of Covent Garden ladies. Harris's list was a huge part of Georgian London's raucous sex trade, written by the so-called Pimp General of all England. There were women in here for anything that you fancied. To look at a copy of Harris's list from 1777 and find out exactly who this mysterious Harris was, I'm meeting historian Katie Wignall. Katie, thank you so much for talking to me about this absolutely fascinating historical document, Harris's List. But before we get into who was on it and what it has to say about them, who was Harris? Was he even a real person?
So Harris was a real person, goes by the name of Jack Harris. And Jack Harris was part of Covent Garden society. He was right in there. He was actually the head waiter at one of the busiest, most notorious coffee houses, the Shakespeare's Head. So because of that, he knew everything that was going on, and a bit like a concierge. Now, what's really interesting is that we don't think he actually wrote the list. He had the information, but the list was actually written kind of like a ghostwriter by a man born in Dublin called Samuel Derrick.
So he uses Jack Harris's name and cachet, but he's the one doing all the work.
Exactly, I know, scandalous. But what's interesting is it probably only succeeded because Jack Harris had that authority.
If you were a sex worker in Old London town in Covent Garden and you wanted to get on this list, what was the process for that?
It's quite hard actually to piece together how it worked. We do have a bit of an insight from a memoir, probably not written by Fanny Murray, who was a famous courtesan. She talks about going to Harris, having to pay £20, being medically examined, and kind of having a written assurance, and then she could be included in the list. Whether that was the same for everyone, I'm not quite sure.
The list is jam-packed full of really colourful and flamboyant characters and descriptions. Which among them stand out to you? I mean, it's a weird question, but do you have any favourites?
I think I'm just a sucker for these like metaphors, I think. So Simon Derrick, when he's writing this, he actually says, as this lady, so this is Mrs. Dixon on Holland Street, as this lady has received favours from an officer in the Navy, we shall describe her in the marine style. He says an old ship in the service, been cruising for several years, but is very little damaged, has many a broadside poured upon her, which is less nice, but often boarded, seldom sprung a leak. So that's good.
I'm going to change my Tinder profile immediately.
You might want to include this as well. So it says near 6 foot from head to stern.
Oh, no, I'm not. That's not me. But still, I'm impressed that she's 6 foot head to stern.
Yeah, so it actually seems to be a fairly, complimentary.
One of the things that I find really interesting in it is it gives the age. What kind of ages are we talking about here?
I think from most of which I've read, it says sort of 2 and 20, but then often when it says, oh, she's 2 and 20 and she's been in the game a few years, from some of the stories of more the famous courtesans, certainly you know that they've been kept as mistresses from the age of 14. Still at that time, I think the age of consent was 12 until it was raised to 13 in around the 1880s, and then to 16 later. So yeah, there is a lot of uncomfortable age difference there.
Not nice.
And the real push, the real prize of virginity. That
they were obsessed with that, weren't they?
Absolutely obsessed. And they wouldn't probably even appear in Harris's list as virgins. That would be the biggest commodity in the sex industry, which is fairly sickening.
It is. So it's really nasty, but there is this trade in very, very young girls. And it doesn't even seem to have been that hushed up, because they're talking about the ages of some of these girls here. But conversely, it's not just a young woman's game. There are older women in this list who are still going strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, old, of course.
Old,
is
it's very, very
comparative
subjective
today, but certainly women in their 40s are mentioned in the list here. But sometimes the women are listed as, chiefly dealing in old fellows. Because people, of course, are attracted to all manner of different things.
Yeah. Harris's list gives us a key insight into sex work on the streets of London. This highlights how sex work was very much out in the open in Georgian society. But it wasn't just London that had one of these lists. Edinburgh in Scotland had one too. Edinburgh in the Georgian period was a polluted, dirty and densely populated place. Edinburgh New Town was created in the 1760s, and those who could afford it gradually moved into this new glitzy urban centre. Those in the lower classes still remained here in Old Town. And even Edinburgh's elite society still had to trek back to the Old Town for one of its biggest industries, sex. I'm travelling there to investigate how these booklets managed to entice buyers across the borders too. Of course, London wasn't the only city to have an almanac of sex workers. Edinburgh had one too. Published in 1775, the Impartial List of the Ladies of Pleasure. It listed the skills, the description, the address, and the costs of some 66 women selling sex all round the capital, several of whom are described as selling sex in this area right here on Bell's Wynd. Who wrote it? A man, obviously. His name was James Tytler. And when he wasn't documenting the ins and outs of Edinburgh's sex workers, he actually edited the Encyclopaedia Britannica. And he was the first Scottish man to go up in a hot air balloon. But when it came to describing the women in his list, I think it's fair to say that he blew very hot and cold. But at least he started strong. He starts with a defence of the women selling sex in the capital.
Why shall the victims of this natural propensity, the volunteers of Venus, be hunted like outcasts from society, be perpetually gripped by the hand of petty tyranny, and the whole race of mankind are the objects of their warm regards?
All across the closes and alleys of this Georgian powerhouse of a city were women selling sex. Here in Bell's Wynd was Miss Walker and her 8 female sex workers, and there were brothels and women working alone all over this area. Further down from Bell's Wynd was Miss Cobb of Monteith's Close.
If you were on the hunt for a partner, you would find her hanging around Monteith Close. Here is his description of Miss Cobb. This lady is short and lusty, with dark brown hair, good skin and teeth, and is about 27 years of age. She is sulky and disagreeable in company. We are sorry to give her the character, but we are determined to be impartial. I hope for Miss Cobb's sake that she never actually read that. But one of the things he does say about her, and he says it about lots of women on this list, is he likes the fact that they have teeth, which doesn't so much tell us about these women's teeth, but about the fact that so few people at the time did have teeth. For that to have been an endearing and notable characteristic, something that you would actually seek out in a partner. They had teeth. On to a winner.
A little bit further down the road was another woman working this patch, apparently of high birth, Lady Agnew.
According to Tytler, this was the hunting ground of one Miss Lady Agnew, who is cited in his list. He's going to start strong. This drunken bundle of iniquity is about 50 years of age, lusty and tall. One thing she can boast of is that she is the daughter of a late baronet who was a brave general in the war before last. Being a disgrace to her relations, who are some of the best in Scotland, they sent her to the north. She regards neither decency nor decorum, and would willingly lie with a chimney sweep as a lord. I told you he was snotty. I told you he was downright bitchy. He's got this really odd attitude to these women. Of course she would lie with a chimney sweep as well as a lord. She's doing it for the money. She's not doing it because she wants to date somebody. Her background story is really interesting. I don't want to do her down and say that she wasn't the daughter of a baronet. But what I will say is that then, just like today, it's all about creating a persona. It's all about fake names and fake backgrounds and fake stories to tell the punters, to tell people like Tytler so they can write it up in their little book. I don't know if she really was the daughter of a baronet, but it's a great story. Walking around the streets of Edinburgh of a Tuesday evening, it makes me think about the women that Tytler was writing about in a very different way. He had his own agenda, but one thing I'm struck by is it's a Tuesday evening, it's cold out here, and it's dark, and I've got a woolen coat on, and I'm well lit. How would those women have worked these streets? And they would have done all round here. It must have been grim. It must have been really grim. What I find frustrating about people like Tytler and Harris, I'm so pleased that they wrote those works. I really am, because if they hadn't, we'd have nothing about those women. We wouldn't know anything about them at all. But it's like, it takes us so close to them, and then we can't get any further, because they didn't write those reviews. None of it is in their words. It's all filtered through the pen of a man who had a completely different agenda. I guess we'll never know.
These lists give us hints and glimpses into who these women were and what they got up to in the back rooms and bedrooms. But it wasn't just these lists of sex workers that helped guide us through the intricacies of sex in the Georgian age. The history of contraception can illustrate some of the lesser-known aspects of this world. And one device that we still use today was becoming integral for defending against pregnancy and disease.
The humble condom. In the 18th century, they were big business. And you might have called yours a glove, or your armour, or my personal favourite, your machine. Casanova famously called his English raincoats. And if anyone knew the value of a good condom, it was Casanova. But what we want to know, how were they made? Who was wearing them? And perhaps most importantly of all, were they any good at protecting against venereal disease and pregnancy? Well, I am going to find out.
Now, we don't know where the word condom comes from. It's not from the infamous Colonel Condom, doctor to Charles II, or from a town in France called Condom. But we do know that one of the earliest uses of the word was actually here in Edinburgh in 1706, in an anti-union poem about the British bringing bad behaviour to Scotland through the newly formed union. I'm at the incredible New Hales House in Edinburgh to find out more about this fascinating topic with condom historian Dr. Kate Stevenson.
So, Kate, we are here to talk condoms.
Yes, we are.
It's really easy to think of condoms as being modern, something that we've only come up with in the last few generations, but that's not right.
No. And there are lots of stories out there that they go back thousands and thousands of years. Now, we don't have a lot of evidence for that,
Okay.
but we do know that they definitely existed from the 1500s. The first record we have comes from an Italian anatomist called Gabriele Falloppio.
Of fallopian tube fame.
Indeed, yes. But a few years later, another Italian comes along, Hercules of Saxonia. He talks about linen condoms, linen sheaths, although of course they aren't called condoms in the 1500s.
Yeah.
Now, actually, I did have a go at making one from entire guesswork, so we can have a look at that.
Oh
but
my God, Kate, you legend.
that
What
is
have you done?
Literally what that is. It is
You've been very generous there, Kate.
Well, so it's not supposed to sit on tight, and that is part of the description. So you've got a little drawstring here to tie it round to hold it in place.
What?
But
That's like an oven mitt.
that's essentially what you're putting on. It may be something that had spermicidal properties, but we don't know for sure. These stick around for about 100 years.
That long?
Yeah, that long, but not in mass usage.
I've been laughing at it, but like it never even would that have protected against anything apart from enjoyable sex?
Not in this state.
No.
But if they were treating it, I do wonder if it was treated with like grease, then it would form more of a barrier and
Would.
make the lubrication a lot better.
Okay.
But no one's done any experiments on it, so, which is probably for the best.
It's useless, really, isn't it?
Essentially,
that's
yeah.
Right, okay.
But
okay.
it is sort of the prototype for where condoms come from.
Yeah, okay.
But then moving on from that, at some point, probably in the 1600s, they start to produce something similarly sized, a bit narrower, made of dried animal gut. Still got its little ribbon around the bottom, because of course. And the idea is that they're dried out for storage so they can't go off. And then you rehydrate them
yes.
before use.
So you would have them and then you'd have to rehydrate them. And then what would you do
So
with
you could
them?
wash them out, dry them out and reuse them.
Ah,
So they were reusable, not forever, but certainly for multiple times.
okay.
And they were, it seems, pretty widely used.
Right.
There are a lot of references that particularly grew up in the 18th century of middle class and upper class men using them quite widely.
Okay.
And of brothels supplying them.
How would you make them?
Well, funny you should mention that. Last week I had a go.
No, you haven't.
I did. So the reason we know how they were made was because there's, come the early 1800s, there's actually some instructions that start to be published. So you can make these at home. Before that, they would be manufactured in workshops.
Okay.
But they start producing recipes, and so we can follow those. And essentially what you do is you take intestines, and they can come from a range of sources. And we do know that there was a trade in glass-blown penis shapes, essentially, to dry your condoms on. The other way, which is the one I used, is basically to blow up lengths of intestines, clip each end or knot each end, and dry them inflated. Then when they're completely dry, they go papery, essentially, because you've got rid of all the fat and you end up with these sort of dry, papery sheaths. So I've got a couple here of different lengths, because we know they were made in different lengths.
Oh my goodness.
So this one's slightly longer. And these are folded in half. These are quite narrow ones. You also got them in different widths as well. So they actually feel just a bit like tracing paper or something like that.
I cannot believe that you made this. This is... And that's the knotted end.
That's the knotted end. And then here's your ribbon. This is sewn round.
So you would have wet this, it would have become more malleable.
Yep.
then you would wriggle it on to an erect willy.
Yep. Tie it in place.
Tie it in a bow.
Yep.
Well, here's the $1 million question. I'm going to give you back this.
Yeah, of course.
You've done such an incredible job. I don't want to break that. But would that have been effective?
Well, we haven't run any tests on sort of surviving examples, but we do know that modern lambskin is very effective at preventing pregnancy. So it's about the same as modern condoms. It's about 98% effective at preventing pregnancy.
Okay.
Completely useless at preventing the spread of venereal disease.
It wouldn't have worked, but it's kind of good to see that people
Committed.
were trying
Absolutely.
safe sex.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Where would you have bought these from?
You could get these from like chemists and druggists and things like that. You could get them from barbers. We do know that you could get them direct from the creators. And a lot of those creators, or certainly the ones that we know about, were women. And so they were running essentially factories, factory production of condoms and selling them wholesale to chemists, but also selling them direct to clients who would come up to where they had the factory and buy them, sometimes in bulk if they were going abroad, from the source, and slightly more cheaply as well.
Condoms were a huge part of sex and sex work in the 18th century. People put a lot of faith in these rather unreliable contraceptives to not get pregnant and to not fall sick. But we know that they didn't always work effectively, which in some cases could lead to a dire situation. So sexually transmitted disease was rife. We can see one such situation in William Hogarth's A Harlot's Progress, printed in 1732. This tells the story of a young woman called Moll Hackabout, who arrives in London, falls into sex work, contracts an infection, which eventually leads to her ruination and death, aged just 23. As usual with Hogarth, the images, 6 plates in total, they're so packed full of detail, they're so satirical. Every time you look at them, you see something new. If we look at the first one here, this is Moll fresh off the stagecoach from the countryside into London. The woman she's talking to here was a famous bawd or madam in London known as Mother Needham. And these people, bawds, were famous for hanging around at the staging coaches looking for young women who'd just arrived in the big city. They'd tell them that they were going to give them a job and that they could sort them out with somewhere to stay, and then before they knew what had happened, they were locked up in a house and forced to sell sex. Moll's face is really fresh here, and if you look at Mother Needham's, you can see the syphilitic marks that she's trying to cover up with beauty spots. The whole thing is full of foreboding, and it's intimidating and scary, and poor Moll has absolutely no idea what's going to happen to her. Moll is now the kept mistress of a wealthy man. We can see her in luxurious surroundings, but this might not last long. As if you look in the background, there is a young man, possibly Moll's lover, sneaking out of the door. This is Moll at the height of her powers. By now the man must have chucked her out. Her room is nowhere near as fancy as her previous lodgings. Moll, she's looking all right, she's got a nice dress on, but coming through the door are the men of the Society of Reformation of Manners, who targeted women like Moll and sent them to jail. And that's exactly where she's ended up. Moll is in a debtor's prison. She's definitely looking a bit sorry for herself. That fresh-faced glow has gone, and she's been robbed. She's no longer the queen of this world, she's a victim of it. And I'm afraid things do not improve for our girl. This is endgame for Moll. She's clearly very sick. The scene behind her is chaos. The room is squalid and she's being robbed. This is not a good world for our Moll to be in at all. In the final scene, we see Moll's funeral. People are gathered round, supposedly to mourn her. But when you look a bit more closely, nobody's mourning Moll. You see these 2 ladies in the background crying. Well, actually, they're crying over a broken fingernail. There's a priest, and you might think, that's good. But look a little bit more closely and you'll see that he has his hand underneath his cassock on his lap. There's a real sense here that Moll has died, but nobody here is learning from this. Nobody is seeing this as a terrible warning or trying to change their ways. In fact, everything grinds on exactly as it did before. The next victims of it are already here. But how accurate was this story? We know that it happened because we have court records and cases and moralists and people wrote about it. And as thousands of people left the countryside for new lives in the city, they were easy prey for people trying to exploit them. The figure of Mother Needham, the bawd, the madam of the brothel, she was real. London, Edinburgh, Bath,
Cities all over the country, they just ate people up and spat them out. They didn't stand a chance, really. It still happens to this very day. The story of Moll is the story of thousands and thousands of nameless women all throughout history.
Hogarth makes it clear that Moll most likely died of a sexually transmitted infection. These were rife across the 18th century. So many people would have lost their lives to these horrific and debilitating diseases. In the Bridgerton universe, men are often seen sleeping with unmarried women, sometimes sex workers, prior to their romantic love interest in the main story. In Series 2, Anthony, the eldest brother, is shown sleeping with a variety of women before he is sent to the marriage market of the Ton. Perhaps the reason that Miss Kate Sharma, his future love interest and almost his sister-in-law, objects to the match between him and a younger sister is due to the rumours of his previous dalliances. In the real historical world, STIs were a massive problem that thousands were facing. In cities like Edinburgh, it all looked rather prim and proper, but in reality, these diseases were running wild.
And I'm here to talk to you about one of the most feared venereal diseases in our history. A disease that could destroy your body, destroy your mind, and make your nose fall off. Yep, we're here to talk about syphilis.
I'm travelling to the Surgeons' Hall Museums to explore what syphilis is and its impact on the body with the help of human remains specialist Kat Irving.
Let's start at the beginning. Let's start right at the page 1 of this. What is syphilis?
Well, syphilis is a bacterial infection. Okay. So it's a bacteria called Treponema pallidum, which is a little spirochete bacteria, which means it's got a spiral shape like a corkscrew. It looks really quite nice when you see it under an electron microscope. But what it does is not very nice.
It could affect your actual bones too.
In some extreme cases, it might get into the membranes that cover your bones. So if we look, this is a normal femur, fairly bog standard. But then this is syphilitic periostitis. So you can see that bone is really thick in comparison. The surface is very, very, very uneven. And this is likely to ache. You know, this is probably going to be quite painful.
Yeah.
And certainly the earliest outbreak of syphilis in 1495 that we know of, there are descriptions of men screaming through the night. So it does react to infection in this way.
And what's happened? These bones here, so that's the leg, I do not fancy that. How many people had it, do we think?
Well, I mean, it's always estimates when you're going back like that. I mean, in London, they thought that 1 in 5 people had syphilis in the 18th century, which is huge, massive. You know. And these were all levels of society.
If I'm an 18th century person, or any person who's ever had this, it's sexually transmitted, I've had medallions. What is that spirochete going to do to me?
Well, the place where it gets into your body, so usually you need to have like a mucous membrane or, you know, abrasion in the skin, something like that. But the spot where it's getting into your body, you'll end up with something called a chancre, which is like a little kind of sore ulcer type thing. And because this is predominantly spread sexually, the chancre will usually appear, you know, in the usual kind of places you'd associate that. You know, the penis, the vulva, vagina, cervix, the anus, the mouth, the hands maybe.
Am I going to feel poorly when that's happening?
You're probably going to feel okay at that point. You might feel a little bit, you know, sort of...
Like I've got a sore on my face.
Yeah. But that's eventually going to go away. You know, it will pass. Week or two, you'll be back to normal. And you might think that's it, that's gone. But a few weeks after that goes away, you get into secondary syphilis territory. And it's got a lot of different ways this can manifest. Syphilis was known as the great imitator. So you might just have sort of cold and flu-like symptoms, you know, a fever. Rash was very, very common, particularly the palms of the hands, soles of the feet.
I do not fancy that, but these look, if it could be, even worse. Like, is this syphilis as well?
This is tertiary syphilis.
Or it was tertiary syphilis.
So You have your secondary syphilis. It may have been fairly minor. You might have got something worse like this. This is something called gummatous syphilis.
It gets around, doesn't it?
Yeah, so a gumma is a little kind of like ball-like structure. Right. It gets a name because of the texture, you know.
Gummy.
Yeah. And they can happen anywhere in the body. So here the gumma has destroyed some of the forehead. And the bone of your skull is basically like a sandwich. So you've got two hard layers and a spongy layer in between.
Right.
So what we see here is that the hard layer has been destroyed, exposing that spongy bone in the middle. But if we turn it around, here it's actually made a hole into the skull.
What would that, so that's what it looks like on the bone, but for the person when they were alive, what would that have looked like on their face?
Well, we've got this wax model. So if we look at this, here we can see the unevenness of the forehead that has been caused by that. And that may eventually get to the point, if it enlarges, that they start to ulcerate and you get ulceration of the forehead. The eyes are really, really unpleasant.
Why does it do that? Why does it go for your eyes and your nose? That's the typical syphilis, your nose falls off.
Yeah, well, one of the places that these gummas are attracted to are the mucous membranes.
You did
so,
say, yes.
So here, the gumma around the orbit of the eye is called, the technical term is ectropion, where it's basically turned the eyelids inside out. So it's not very nice. Some people had prosthetic noses.
Right.
You know, you would wear a pair of glasses with a
I
nose
would go for
attached.
that, I think.
Yeah.
That's a good
but again,
one.
that's going to be obvious.
So if you catch this thing, and it seems like a lot of people did, it spread very, very rapidly. What treatment options were available apart from a prosthetic nose?
Well, the treatment options were not very nice either. Right. So the main treatment at this point was mercury.
And what does mercury do to the body?
Well, mercury is very unpleasant. It can cause a fever. It can cause rashes. Exposure to mercury can give you dementia. It can make your teeth and hair fall out. It can cause kidney failure. So, you know, it's not something you really want either.
Seeing those bones and organs laid out on a table like that, it was really quite shocking. It gave me such a jolt to remember that these were real people suffering from real diseases. But sex in the Georgian world isn't just about darkness. Sex was fun, sometimes out in the open and sometimes in more hidden spaces. Secret sexual subcultures, including those in the queer community, changed the landscape of sex in Georgian society. To find out more, I'm meeting back up with Julie Peakman. What I'm finding quite surprising about sex in the Georgian period is it seems to be like quite out in the open. There were secret societies, there weren't there? Because it couldn't all be open and everyone having a rollicking time. Tell me about some of the more hidden sexual subcultures.
One of the main ones was the molly houses, and these were establishments where homosexual men could go to meet and have sex. One of the main molly houses we know about was Mother Clapp's molly house, and we know about her because she came to trial. In the Reformation, the Society for the Reformation of Manners was the problematic spy, and they more or less tricked people. They'd got witnesses to inveigle into the molly houses to find out what was going on. And then they'd have little mock ceremonies of either wedding ceremonies or birthing ceremonies where they gave birth to wooden dolls. So it was all this sort of like mock satirical attitude towards the normal marriage and normal sex life.
So when you're reading about the mollies, unfortunately, the richest source that's left to us are the court records from when people were arrested and prosecuted, tried and sometimes executed. But you do get like flashes into the culture, and often with the names, I find is really fascinating. There was a Princess Seraphina. Where did that name come from?
This came from when they started meeting in the molly houses, and what they wanted was female names to make it much more authentic for them as in their relationships. They often call themselves by the names of well-known courtesans. Their real names didn't get as much publicity, except, as you said, in the trials.
So Mother Clapp's Molly House is the most well known, but were there others? And do we have any kind of a sense of how common they were, or how many there were?
There was flagellation societies. The one that we know about is a female flagellation society that operated from Jermyn Street in London. And we know about this from Ned Ward, who was a journalist who used to go around London talking to people and finding out tidbits of sex and naughty things to write in his journal, in his newspaper. The other sort of societies, or secret sex societies, mainly all male.
Was there a female equivalent? Were there lesbian Molly houses, or they wouldn't be called Molly houses? Or is there any evidence? What were lesbians doing in the 18th century?
Most of the women that I've written about were actually lesbians who went and had sex within their own homes. And it was easy to do that because there was female friendships, and you just used to share beds anyway. And that was an acceptable thing to do with your friends. And women, of course, were much less important. There was no threat to the status quo like there was with male homosexuality.
These weren't the only hidden sex clubs in the raucous Georgian period. I'm travelling to West Wickham and getting unique access to the site of a very special sex club, whose members came from some of the most elite echelons of society. The Hellfire Club. Not the one from Stranger Things. No. The original Hellfire Club, founded hundreds of years before television was even conceived. What was it? It was a secret society founded by and for the exclusive use of aristocratic men. And it was said that at these club meetings they would indulge every wild sexual desire, every debauched inclination. Every club needs a club house. And this club was very underground, quite literally underground. And I am here at the Hellfire-Caves with exclusive access to show you around. It's pretty scary, but I am ready to do this if you are. Dashwood created this set of caves deep underground in his estate here at West Wickham. Each of these chambers are connected through intricate passageways. Forget the boys of the Bullingdon Club or the girls and boys of Soho House. This club was rumoured to have only the most socially elite as its members, including the Earl of Sandwich, the Prince of Wales, William Hogarth, various MPs, and apparently even the founding father of the United States and close friend of Dashwood's, Benjamin Franklin. Dashwood was famous for his libertine lifestyle. The original home of the Hellfire Club was in the grounds of a ruined abbey, but it's said that they relocated underground to these caves. We don't know what they got up to there. All the records of the meetings were destroyed by the club's official secretary, Paul Whitehead, 3 days before he died. But looking around, I don't know, were they doing tiddlywinks down here? We have absolutely no idea. But it's said that these little rooms off to the side, in this large room, which was the banqueting hall, this was where gentlemen of the club would take their ladies. Horace Walpole said of the Hellfire Club that their practices were rigorously pagan, and that Venus and Bacchus were the deities to whom they prayed. I just standing here, honestly, it does give you chills. It does. I don't know if it's sexy, but it's got a lot of drama. I'll give it that. These caves came from Dashwood's adventures in Europe, where he visited caves and temples on his grand tour. Down these windy tunnels, they would have partied with sex workers and potentially held huge orgies. As we crossed over the River Styx, which was named by Dashwood himself, it was named after the famous river in Greek mythology, where it was said that the dead had to cross over to get to the underworld. We entered this sort of rather odd cavernous room. This was said to be the inner temple of the Hellfire Club, with Dashwood seeing himself as a kind of Hades figure. Again, we don't know what they got up to in here, but it's said this is where they held their mock ceremonies, their satanic rituals, their
mass orgies and deflowering of virgins and just about anything else that you could think of. But we just don't know. So what do you think? Was this somewhere where upper-class men enjoyed every whim, every indulgence, behaving fantastically badly? Or maybe it was just a nice folly to bring guests, something to show off when friends came over. Hard to say, but I think I know where I'd put my money.
These caves again show me that there were clear winners and losers of this age, the wealthy elite compared to the working classes. Whether it was any of this, we'll never know. But something we do know is as the Georgian period began to wane, a new kind of Britain was forming. One that was a little bit more stiff upper lip than stiff in the nether regions.
When the Victorian period started, they were generally quite horrified at the sexual licentiousness and debauchery that had gone before, and they really tried to model themselves against it and frame themselves as pillars of sexual morality. At least that's what they like to tell each other. But what can we learn from the Georgian period? We like to think of them as almost entirely different species. Like, we couldn't possibly do the things that they were doing then, but I'm not so sure. They were dealing with rapid rates of STIs, with issues around sex work, with gay people being persecuted, with reproductive issues, with pornography. Is it okay? Is it not okay? I don't know how far those conversations have actually evolved in the hundreds of years since then. We're still dealing with all of those things, just in slightly different ways. And when it comes to who were winners and losers of the Georgian period, well, the rich were winners. Rich and powerful people, they got to have the kind of sex that they wanted to, pretty much consequence-free. And I'm not sure that has changed all that much either.
In the next episode, we'll be going on a ride through booze, drugs, and rock and roll stars. Find out who sent Byron a letter with pubic hair in it, why and how gin became the establishment's biggest enemy, which celeb ate a banknote on a slice of bread, buttered of course, and watch me try snuff for the first time. Want to know even more about this titillating time period? Then you can check out my podcast Betwixt the Sheets, where we have a special 4-part series all about the reality of the world of Bridgerton, exploring sex, drugs and rock and roll Georgian style. And I don't stop with the Georgians, oh no, I also delve into medieval, Tudor and ancient sexuality and much, much more. Listen to Betwixt the Sheets free wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you there.